First of all, thank you very much for having me here at your place and to invite me to your workshop. That is always amazing to be here. I love to come in and to see all the instruments, the percussion instruments and the books. It's really good. So thank you very much.
With pleasure.
I was thinking, what could I ask you? Because of course we know we talk about these things in the last 8 years, since 2012. So I was thinking, what should I ask in a different way? And as this will be a small conversation, I would not go so in deep in some pieces, but just general questions about some of your choices as a composer. And one of the first questions I want to ask is, when did the call to use the elements from other cultures start to emerge in music?
In a way, this came very early, because I was always searching for something different, and maybe even not first on the level of the music or on the level of the arts, but more of the philosophy and the religion. And I think it's already written pieces like Mysterium in '89 that I really was influenced by Eastern culture, and it was at that moment a purely philosophical and spiritual influence. So I am always someone who is searching for the different things, what's happening in the different parts in the world, not only musical but also just on the level of humanity or on the human level.
Okay. And so this was the first piece you used this kind of ideas. Okay. Yeah. I know that you're using also in a lot of your pieces elements from Africa, like confrontations, in India, ragas, Middle East, nostalgia, Tibet, Nepal, the tantric cycle. Why these influences?
I think I tried to make a journey through the world, and as I said, it started on a philosophical level, and then I went to Africa. And Africa, probably it's the connection that I have with my instrument as a percussion player, and also always fascinated by the idea of what a groove is. So not what rhythm is, but what groove is. And I think it was already in '85 that I went for the first time to Black Africa, and then confrontations and the pieces that were inspired by this culture came later, especially confrontations, because I made it really happening in Burkina, really made it there. And after Africa or before Africa already, there was the Indian influence by the ragas. It's a little bit on the same moment. The journey to Africa came a little bit later, but the African music came maybe first. And with the ragas, I really discovered something what for me was at that moment very important: a new approach to music, a new approach to what can I do on a musical level, and maybe also even not neglecting my Western background as the musician, but giving it a kind of new approach, giving it thinking in a different level to my Western musicianship in a way. And that was for me very important in studying the ragas and studying the Indian music and Indian art and so on. And then later came other musical traditions like music from the Middle East, collaboration with musicians from the Middle East, and I think it's for me important to connect musicians from the world, and I think I did that in pieces like, for example, Nostalgia, and of course, Tantric Cycle is then again something else. I wanted to go again to Nepal, to Kathmandu, to Tibet, to really study, maybe even also again to study the philosophy, but it became a kind of musical journey also.
Before you started these pieces, did you go to the places, or you started the pieces just by, I don't know, reading about them, listening their music?
Both, and it's a really good question, because that's always you can travel in your mind also, so you don't have to go always. We see, for example, due to the situation that for the last 2 years. We couldn't travel, but we could read about other places, we could experience other places in a different level. But I have the feeling that when you really go there, and I think, for example, for Confrontations, it was important to go to Africa and to realize the piece there. It gives completely a different vibe to your music and to your being as a person, as a musician, but also as a human being. So I think it's both in my music. It's the study through books, through literatures, through whatever things we can find, but it's also being there. And I think that's, for me, the experience also of the music, or even the spirituality, what I could express later in the tantric cycle. I don't think I could have done that if I was not there, and probably the same with Confrontations. With India, it was a little bit later, because I went later to India than when I composed the raga. And I think it was not bad, because at that moment I could take a little bit distance from it. So, and that's for me a very important aspect, so that you not imitate these cultures, but that you use them, or that you try to use them as a kind of inspiration source. And yeah. Yeah, and maybe this is something.
I was thinking, because one of the questions I have here is, for example, what does it give to your music?
I think it's
this kind of rework or introduction of different elements into your music. What does it give?
I think, first of all, as I was explaining, it is a kind of. I want to be very honest with these traditions. I want to not see them as a kind of flavor, or as a kind of sauce, or an extra sonority or something like that. No, it's really. First of all, it starts with fascination for the culture, and then also respect for the culture, and for the cultural heritage, and also in my case, a lot, of course, the respect for the musical traditions, and how I can bring them together, and how they can influence my own work. So I always say I never want to imitate, let's say, Indian music, Indian ragas. And if you really want to hear pure Indian ragas, listen to Indian music. You don't have to listen to my ragas, because there are a kind of, I took the inspiration, I took parts of the theory, the knowledge, the vibe of that musical aesthetic and musical theory, but I did it in my way. So for me, if you ask me, I think I learned to think in a different way as a Western musician through studying other cultures. So, and I think even not as a musician, but as a person, I think learning about the other enriches you also. And I think that's maybe part of my basic philosophy. I like music, I love art, but I also love people, and through this discovery, I think I could connect these two, maybe basic elements of my life in a way.
that you composed before you went there, what would you change now? How would the piece be different?
I don't know if the piece would be, of course, maybe the piece would be different, but I think I also want to certain moments close chapters. So to see this was from another period. Although the Indian music, if I look at my cello concerto, for example, I went back to the Indian period or to the Indian music. So I couldn't really stop closing a period or closing a kind of relation with the culture, but I also want to take at certain moments some distance from it, because otherwise when you're really obsessed by a culture, you become part of that culture, and I don't think it's possible for me to become part of an Indian culture, because I am still a Western person, and I think it's good that I stay a Western person also, because otherwise it becomes blurry also. So I don't know if I definitely I would make it different when the pieces were composed or when composed there. But I also like the idea that some of my music or some of my interests in the cultures was from a kind of distance, and literally a distance. I was living here in Antwerp, in Belgium, while the music I was listening to, I was studying, was from another continent.
I have some questions about the process of composition, and of course we are talking about a lot of works that you composed with different elements, and so this question is really open, but is how do you work these influence in pieces, and maybe if I can be a bit more concrete. When you use these elements, when do they emerge in your music? Do you plan them from the beginning of the compositional process, or are there works that you first start to compose and then in middle, by some reason, you start to introduce these elements?
Of course, it's in the period where I am now at the moment as an artist, as a composer, I think I am working quite intuitively at the moment. So I'm not planning so much in advance anymore. True, because probably it's a little bit the experience, it's the way that you compose so many music already, and that you trust also. I trust a lot on my intuition now, so it's possible, and probably all my heritage, also all the knowledge I gathered through studying different cultures, it comes together in a way in my work at the moment, even if I don't know it before when I start composing. I think of maybe my last work that I'm composing now, or that I'm finishing now, is the big opera, where you see everything that I did comes together. Before, I was very clearly busy with trying to make everything clear in what we call a pre-composition. So the concept should be clear, so the relation with what I wanted to express, and in what relation, for example, that cultural relation, think of the ragas, for example, I wanted to be clear in what direction I wanted to emerge these two musical cultures, and for example, and then it becomes very concrete. So it's really on the level of the musical parameters. It's on the level of the form, for example. If we take the ragas, it's based on this idea of an alap, an introduction, the presentation of the notes of the mode, and the ga, the presentation of the tala structure, and so on, so on. So it's really based on the basic materials of that cultural musical heritage. And that was at that moment. The same was happening when I was, for example, working now on nostalgia. It was really based on this idea of modal structure, but also microtonality relations between that modal structures. And so it's quite concrete on the musical level also. So it's not a kind of a flavor, but it's really diving into the different musical parameters and trying to understand them. And of course, it's not a scientific reproduction of a maqam in Eastern music or something like that, but it's an interpretation. But it's very close to what it's on the musical theoretical level of that culture.
But my question also comes from you said before that in this opera you use a lot of. I never heard this opera because it was never performed, so I don't know the opera. But you said that it brings a lot of things that you did in the past. So, but did you think about this from the beginning? Of course, I would say that it can be influenced by the libretto that you are working, or did it come in the middle of the piece? Then you.
No, I think for me, like the opera is, it's of course it's a big work, and it's a kind of synthesis. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to connect the things that I did in the past. I think there are new things that I want to discover, but it's not a completely new style that I'm writing, and so it's really a kind of I don't want to say it's a summary of what I did, but it's kind of. I knew exactly that, for example, also when I read the book, not immediately the libretto, but the book that triggered me to write the opera, I immediately chose probably that opera because it was about different cultures. It was about a struggle between different cultures. It was about an impossible love between people from different cultures. So you can imagine when I read a book like that, immediately that triggers me to write my opera. And I think, of course, I don't say I was searching for a kind of book like that because you don't find it. It's always like that. It comes to you. The book comes to you. But it's because I saw it immediately. It was very funny because when I read the book in 2 days, the third day I composed the opera, immediately knowing that there should be a non-Western music ensemble in the orchestra pit, knowing that there should be choirs from different communities taking part in the opera. So it comes immediately into the conceptual moment, to call it like that. It's not something that I start to calculate or start to see what can I do. I see the beginning of every piece, but especially also pieces related to that cultures or to different cultures. It's a moment that everything comes together, and then you make a dissection and you make a study or you make a refinement of what you know, and then it comes. But for example, I think the opera, the Convert, that's the title of the opera, will be a kind of quasi-synthesis of what I did in my life, not only as a musician but also as a person. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I will try to watch the opera, and I invite everyone that will see this to watch the opera. So you talk a lot about spiritual journeys, like when we talk about tejas or the tantric cycle.
Yeah.
Do you have the will or the need to go back to those places that you visit to renew or to refresh? Because you said that it's really important to go there.
Yeah, it's a very weird situation at the moment, and it's a very good question because the more, and it's something I read also by a philosopher, the more you go east, you become west again. So it's so when you travel at a certain moment, when you travel literally or in the mind, immediately at a certain moment you come back to your own place. And this is also what happened, for example, in Revelations. And when I composed Revelations, based on maybe my spiritual background, really coming from the church background, Christian background, with Hadewig. I had the feeling that I did a whole cycle. So at the moment after the opera, it's a big question I ask myself. I want to go back to a journey. I don't know if it's again the same journey or if I have to go in another direction but it's definitely something that will connect people and will connect cultures. I don't think I can leave that behind and do something completely different. That would not fit with my intention.
It's your identity as a composer.
Yeah, it's my identity. If you ask me, Wim, should you go back to the same places? I don't know, because they have also a kind of sacred relation that I have with them, and sometimes it's good to leave that be behind you. And if you go there again, maybe the tension is not so strong, and maybe it's even a dissolution if you go back. So I don't know if I want to go back. Definitely I want to go somewhere else again.
Okay.
But if it's the same place, I don't know.
Well, with this, actually, we arrived to my last question. And I think it's a bit connected to what you said now, that maybe to travel, to go to different places. And my question is, when are you going to Portugal to get some inspiration for new pieces and to use Portuguese elements in your music?
You know, it's on my list also to go from Portugal to maybe to Latin America. So these are cultures that I really love. Cultures that I want to discover again. I discovered them a little bit, of course, through my students, but also through my percussion playing. If I think of all these Latin American traditions and so on, so it's definitely something, and I feel that's so interesting that you, for example, go back to your tradition, which is maybe much stronger, and this is a question that through. For example, through you and through other people, not only from Portugal, but from other parts of the world, students from other parts of the world, made me think of my own relation to my own culture. Because that's, now with Revelations, I found a kind of relations to my spiritual background, but like to go back to my traditional background, if maybe for me that would be only the polyphonists, for example, the Flemish polyphonists, because I don't feel that connection so much to my culture. And thanks to Revelations and maybe thanks to the talks we had also about identity and about cultural identity, thanks to these two, I think in Revelations, that would be that's maybe the strongest piece that makes the connection to my background, heritage. I think that there, in that piece, it's the most related to my own tradition, if I could call it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this conversation.
With pleasure.
My pleasure.